right, so guys, for today, we are doing our last new section of new material for this chapter. Now, your test is not going to be, I think I have it on for next Friday, so it's still a week out. Reason being, we're going to kind of do some practice on, like, if I just give you a problem, how to tell which method to use and things like that. So we'll spend more time on that next week. But today's the last day of new stuff. All right, so we're using the quadratic formula. I already heard Carrie singing the song. I have other songs to play for you guys. But there is the quadratic formula. So right now on your salmon, orange, whatever color paper you want to call that, underneath quadratic formula, write it down. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Oh, that's not good. So this time when you take it, you're going to get them all right. No, not. You're going to be great. You'll be great. Now, that formula, you have to memorize. I am not supplying it for you. You have to know it. If you write it down in the corner of your test from your memory, that's fine. Because if you're anything like me, I remember when I was in high school, there's stuff I had to know. I'm like studying. As soon as the teacher's like, you got to put that away. And I'm like, okay, put it away, grab my test, and then like I write everything down real fast. That's what I do. I always did that in high school. So could you do that? Sure. That's fine. All right. The other thing I want to point out to you guys, if you write this incorrectly by even just the littlest bit, I'm taking points off. What I mean by that, just so you know where I'm coming from, if you write this, let me rewrite it over here. So negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Is that right? It's 4ac. What's wrong with it? It's not under the radical. If it's not under the radical, that's wrong. You need to make sure your radical covers everything. If it doesn't, it's wrong. Guys, math is very particular on its symbols. Okay, if that radical stops, then anything not under that radical is not under the radical. You would simplify what's under it, and then you'd multiply it by what's after it. So you need to make sure your radical is long enough. Here's the big thing I get most often from students. I get that. Right. If I write it this way, I'm assuming I'm going to get this answer divided by 2a, and then I'm just going to add and subtract that to the b. That's wrong. Okay? You have to make sure that fraction bar is underneath all of it, and your radical has to go over everything. Okay? So just telling you now, I will count off every time I see it not written the correct way. The Adele one I'll play at the end of class. That's a longer one, so I'll let that one play at the end. All right. But in other words, you have to memorize this. You have to know it. I will probably play the Pop Goes the Weasel version periodically just to annoy the crap out of you because it gets stuck in your head and you can't stop singing it. What? Soothing. I think that's quite the word. All right. All right, here we go, guys. So on your salmon-colored paper, let's kind of write a few things down. Or orange, or whatever color you want to call it. All right, guys. So you have your formula written down. You need to set the equation equal to 0. Carson, thank you. All right, so we're going to set the equation equal to 0. So just like factoring, right? Factoring set equal to 0. Quadratic formula set equal to 0. What about square root method? Square root method set equal to 0? Yesterday was the square root method. Did we set them equal to 0? No! You isolated the x squared yesterday. Oh my gosh, you guys. Don't pay any attention. All right, so we need to set this equal to 0. And then, let's do it this way. You will plug in values for a, b, and c. How do I know what is a, b, and c? Obviously, the formula has them, but where are they coming from? It's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Right? The number with your squared is a, the number with the x is b, the number by itself is c. What if one of those parts don't exist? in my equation? I put in a 0. Don't just not do anything. Okay, you need to put a 0 in because dividing or multiplying by a 0 changes the value of things. Okay, so make sure you plug those in. Okay, then you will simplify under the radical. So you will actually figure out what is b squared minus 4ac. What does that value equal? Okay, do not type that radical in your calculator. It will give you a decimal. All right, so simplify what's under the radical. And then you will, let's just write factor tree. All right, factor tree. You guys know what that means, right? So do your factor tree, meaning simplify the radical from there then. Right, but notice it says simplify under the radical. So you're actually calculating what that equals. And then do your factor tree on the radical. And then divide all 3 if possible. And I'll explain what that means in a little bit. It has to be all 3 if you're going to do that. We'll look at some problems in a minute, and I'll show you what that means. All right. We ready? No. All right. So first thing, set it equal to 0. So we're going to have ax squared plus 3x minus 2 equals 0. Scoot it over. Okay. So what is my a value? That is 1. You are not plugging x squared into that equation. That's going to get an ugly mess. What's your b? And your c? Negative 2. If there's a minus in front of it, it is attached. Make sure you bring that sign along with you. All right, so we're going to plug it in. So we have x equals. Now the formula says negative b. What does that mean? It means switch the sign of it, really. It means like opposite of b. So if my b is a positive 3, I'm going to write down negative 3. What if b was already negative? Then I'd make it positive. Okay? So plus or minus square root b squared. So my b was 3. So 3 squared. I would like you to get into the habit, because you will probably be very calculator-dependent people at this step, making sure whatever you plug in for that b, put it in parentheses. Remember we've talked about like a negative number squared, whether it's in parentheses or not in parentheses, it makes a difference. Your calculator's smarter than you want it to be. Okay. Minus 4 times a, which was 1, times c, which was negative 2, all over, watch how long your fraction bars are, 2 times a. I would expect to see everyone write that down on their papers. Okay? Write down what you're plugging in. Okay, my next step then is to simplify under the radical. So x equals negative 3 plus or minus radical what? This is where you can grab your calculator. Let's be honest, it's just faster. Type in 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 2 and tell me what you get. 17. Now, one thing I have noticed, some students try to do everything in their head, which I can appreciate that you're doing math in your head. But when you're plugging stuff in within your head, you need to make sure when people do it here, they're like, yeah, 4 times 1 times negative 2, and they just tell me that that is negative 8, and then they leave this as a minus 8 in here, which actually it's 2 negatives, which make that a positive. So if you're doing it in your head, be careful. Otherwise, just grab your calculator, just type it in. You typed something in wrong then. Try it again. I want to make sure we get it right, because if we can't use the calculator, we're in trouble later on. Did you figure it out? Yeah. Did you still not get 17? Did you use a negative? You're typing in the radical. Do you ever feel like you just talk to the wall? No one's ever listening. You found the square root of 17, which is not pretty, which is why we don't type in the radical, because you get an ugly decimal. All right, can I do a factor tree on 17? Nope. Now, my last step that says divide all 3 if possible. What that means is when I'm going to try to simplify my fraction here, it has to be this number. There's a 1 here technically. This number and this one. Because for you to try to simplify, all of 3 of those numbers are being divided together, technically, right? Like, technically, I could write this as negative 3 over 2 plus or minus 1 radical 17 over 2. This means the same thing. I'm just a lazy mathematician. Since they're both divided by 2, I'm just going to put one big divide by 2. Some of you guys do that when you solve, right? You just draw a big old fraction, divide by whatever. It's the same idea. So if I'm going to simplify, like divide them all by 2, divide them all by 3, whatever the simplifying is, it has to be all 3 of them, because all 3 of them all work together. Okay? So negative 3, 1, and 2 don't all divide by anything, so I am done. So right here is as simplified as I can get that. So would this problem have been able to been factored to start with? So if I go back and try to factor this, I'd have, last one's negative, so your signs would have been different. Options for A would have been just x and x. The only option here is 2 and 1. I would have added 2 minus 1. I can't get a 3 because my signs have to be opposite. So it doesn't factor. That's the problem. So if this doesn't factor, could I have used the square root method on this? What we did yesterday? Yes or no? Regardless of the fact that it's set equal to 0 right now, in order to do the square root method, what has to be missing? The bx term has to be missing, and it has one. So I can't use the square root method on this. So if it doesn't factor, and I can't do the square root method, I need another option to solve. That's where the quadratic formula comes in. Okay? So not everything can be factored. I can't use the square root method on everything. Could you use the quadratic formula on all of them? The quadratic formula will solve any, Carrie, quadratic equation. Any x squared equation it will solve. So everybody's like, well, why did we have to learn to factor and use the square root method? If this works on all of them, why don't I just use this every time? It takes a lot of time. Yeah. For me, it's faster to factor or square root method. This works, but it's sometimes long. Sometimes it gets ugly. Okay? All right, take a look at the next one. X squared minus 2x plus 10 equals 2. What do we got to do? Move the 2. That's right, get it out of there. So x squared minus 2x plus 8 equals 0. What's your A value? What's your B? Negative 2. And your C? Good. All right, so we plug everything in, right? X equals negative B, so a positive 2. Good. Plus or minus square root, just make sure it's long enough. B squared, if you do not put this in parentheses, it will be wrong. So if you get in the habit, always plug them in with parentheses. Minus 4, A is 1, C is 8, all over 2 times A, which is 1. Okay, so first step, just plug it all in, write it all down. Don't be so lazy that we don't do that part, okay? All right, next we're going to clean up under the radical. So am I typing the radical in my calculator? No, I'm not. I guarantee you were not the only person who did that. You were just the only one who talked to me. So 2 plus or minus radical, negative what? Negative 28. What? Yeah, because that'd be 4 minus 32, which is negative 28. If you did not get that, double check what you typed in. And you got 128? Jacob, what did you do wrong? Oh, I bet I know what you did. I bet you used the negative button instead of the 2 squared. If you got negative 128, when you typed it in, that symbol right there, you used the negative sign instead of the minus. That's a minus. Yes. If you hit the negative sign, it's multiplying them all together. So if you go back and just change that one sign, it should fix it for you. But this is why we talk about these things, guys, right? That way you know later that you don't do that. All right. From there, our next step, we get rid of the negative, which is going to become I. So I'm going to be lazy and just kind of erase that out there. All right, so we know there's an I. Factor tree on that. Good. So we have 2 plus or minus, it'd be 2I radical 7 over 2. Right, so we simplified under the radical, right? I wrote that down. I did my factor tree to keep simplifying. Then the last thing says divide all 3 if possible. Do all 3 numbers divide? Yes. Now, here is the number one thing students mess up. Most students will recognize they can divide them all. They totally will. But they don't write down the right answer. Now, you guys just said that correct. Here's what most students don't write down. They don't write down that 1. Now, why did I have to write the first one, but I didn't write the 1 there, and I didn't write the divide by 1? This one is implied. Technically, the bottom one's implied, right? Does changing or putting a 1 here, like if I would not write that 1, would it change the value? Yeah, because let's just forget the I in the radical for a minute. If I wrote 1 plus or minus 3, what would you tell me that is? Be 4 and a negative 2. Okay, what if I wrote this? It's just plus or minus 3. Yeah, you would never think to, there's got to be a 1 sitting in front of that, right? No, we don't imply that. Okay, so the 1 that's being added and subtracted, this 1 in front, you have to write down. It's not implied. Just like you would not assume there's a 1 sitting there. Does that make sense? Okay, so most people, that's what they'll forget. They forget that first 1. All right, next one. I gotta laugh as we go through these. A lot of these dog pictures, my dog actually has a lot of these costumes. I made that one for my dog a few years ago, so he has that one. It's not my dog, though. He has this one, too. He's got the bumblebee. What was the other one? He doesn't have that one. It just makes me laugh that my dog's got a lot of these. All right, so what do I do with this one first? It's ready to go, right? It's already set equal to 0. What's my A? B? C? All right, so we're just going to plug everything in. So x equals negative b, so negative 6, plus or minus, square root, make sure it's long, b squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 9, all over 2 times a, which is 1. All right, so then what? Simplify under the radical. So x equals negative 6 plus or minus radical 0. What's the square root of 0? 0. So x equals negative 6. Do I need to write plus or minus 0? No. So what do we get? Negative 3. Now, one thing I want you guys to start to recognize, when you get nice answers, meaning there's no I, there's no radical, what's that mean about the original problem? It could have been factored. Yeah. Because if I had asked you to factor this, last one's positive, so they're the same. Both plus, both minus? Both plus. X and X. And then it would be 3 and 3. So you'd get negative 3 and negative 3. So that's why we ended up with just negative 3. So what one's faster? Factoring's faster. Okay, that's why we learn to factor, because it is the fastest option. But could you check every question on your test if you really wanted to? Yeah, you really could. Okay, what about that one? You know what? Try this one on your own. All right, guys. So first thing, we need to move the 5 over. So we get 5x squared plus 8x plus 5 when you move that. So my a is 5, b is 8, c is 5. All right, so plugging it in, x equals negative b, which would be negative 8, plus or minus square root b squared, so 8 squared, minus 4 times 5 times 5, all over 2 times 5. Okay, that's you just plugging everything in. If you have a wrong sign in there at any point, it's going to be wrong. So cleaning up, so negative 8 plus or minus radical, just typing that in your calculator. It's going to give you negative 36 all over 10. What is the square root of negative 36? It is 6i. And then the last step is if you can divide all 3 numbers. Now let's talk here for a minute, guys. So all 3 numbers, can I divide them all by something? Now, some students panic. They're like, wait, one has an I. Right. So what? I have to have like terms when I add and subtract, not when I multiply and divide. So it's got an I on it. I don't care. All right, I'm still dividing them all. So I get negative 4 plus or minus 3i over 5. How'd we do? My brother? No? Nope. I don't have a brother. I beat him to oblivion. I'm not factoring. I don't have one. I'm not factoring. All right. Michael Jackson dog. He's a little disturbing. He's too realistic. He's just kind of weird. But anyway. All right. It's already set equal to 0. So my A, B, C. What happens if I miss one sign? It's wrong. It's very wrong. All right. So x equals negative b, so negative 4, guys, plus or minus, square root b squared, so 4 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 3, all over 2 times 1. After you write it down, what do I do next? Under the radical. Grab your calculator, type it in. Just don't type in the radical. All right, so I typed in what is underneath the radical. Found out that's 28. Don't type the radical in. Your next step is to factor tree, if you can, which I can. Okay, so we get x equals negative 4 plus or minus, add a pair of 2's and a leftover 7, all over 2. And then your last step is all 3 numbers. Do you notice I keep emphasizing that? It has to be all 3. What if 2 of them can be? No, then you can't. It has to be all 3. All 3. Right? Divide them all by 2. So I end up with negative 2 plus or minus. This is 1. Do I have to write the 1? No. Not this one, I don't. It's implied. Do I need the 1 on the bottom? Nope. If it's a 1, which one do I have to write? In the first one. It's technically not an A spot, but I need, if that first digit before the plus minus is a 1, I have to write it. Otherwise, they're implied. Could this problem have been factored? No. Look at your answer. It's got a radical in it. If it's got a radical or an I, it would not have factored. Could you have used the square root method on this problem? No. It's got a B term. Now, in this case, like when we factor, that's like our instinct, right? Move the negative squared term to the other side. With this formula, does it really matter? Yeah, it doesn't really matter with the formula. I will just to stay consistent with what we've done, but you wouldn't have to. So I'm going to move it over there and make that positive x squared. I have a plus 4x, and I'm going to move the 12, make it plus 12. So I don't have any negative signs once I moved it. If you moved it the other way, you have lots of negatives. Don't matter. The formula will still work out either way. We are not factoring. When the directions say solve, will this factor? It won't factor. You can try all you want, but it's not going to factor. All right. So 1, 4, thank you, and 12. Let's plug it in. X equals negative b, which is negative 4, plus or minus square root b squared, so 4 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. So questions right now as to where the a, b, and c are coming from and how to plug them in? Okay. Guys, when a lot of you, I just want to kind of make you aware of your classmates, okay? Some of you, when you shout out answers right away, or like, nope, we're good. What if you have somebody sitting next to you who's not good? Do you think they're going to say anything? No. It's going to make them feel dumb, okay? So just be aware of your classmates. Some of you I know pick up on math really fast, and there's some of you in here that struggle a little more. Okay, I want to make sure they feel comfortable asking questions in class as well. Okay. All right, from here, let's clean up underneath that radical. So we're going to type that in the calculator. So we get negative 4 plus or minus radical 16 minus 48, so negative 32. All over 2. Your next step was to factor tree. Okay, I can factor tree this. It's 8 and 4, 2 and 2, 2 and 4, 2 and 2. So negative 4 plus or minus. What do I know is attached to this answer? An I, because there's a negative under there. So pair of 2's gives me 4. So 4i radical 2 all over 2. All 3 numbers. So I can divide them all by 2. So then we get negative 2 plus or minus 2i radical 2 all over 1, which I don't actually need. Do I ever divide the number in the radical? When does the radical get touched? What am I doing with it? I'm doing a factor tree on it. But as far as when I'm dividing to simplify, do not divide in that radical. Okay, you cannot do that. All right, next problem. 4x squared plus 7x equals 15. What do we got to do? Subtract the 15. These always have to be set equal to 0. So 4x squared plus 7x minus 15 equals 0. What's your A? B? C? And you can finish it. All right, a lot of you were doing great, and you're like, yes, I got this. You're done. You circled your answer, and it wasn't complete. I was going to go over it, but, Jasiri was like, can we do this on our own? So I let you go. All right, so negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. All right, so negative 7 plus or minus radical 289 over 8, which was negative 7 plus or minus 17 over 8. And that is where most of you stopped, which is great, but you're not done. Do you have any radicals? Do you have any i's? So do you remember square root method yesterday? If you had just numbers, you had to put them together. You still have to do it here. Where did I get what, 7? This one? My b value is a 7? Negative b? All right. So guys, most of you stopped here because you're like, all three numbers don't divide, right? Guys, pay attention because I'm taking off every single time you do this wrong. Plus minus means I'm doing two operations, right? That's two answers. So what's negative 7 plus 17? That's 10 over 8, which is 5/4. There's one answer. What's negative 7 minus 17? It's negative 24 over 8, which is negative 3. So my two answers are 5/4 and negative 3. When you do not have a radical or an I, you have to keep going. I can simplify further. Would this problem have been factorable? Yes, it would have. I got answers that don't have I's and radicals. That means you could have factored. Okay. So anytime you get, if you have an I or a radical, though, you're done. You can't go any further other than dividing all three numbers. All right. So next problem. Cute little minion dog. Do you want to move everything to the right? Yeah? Let's move it all to the right. So 0 equals, makes that positive 8x squared, positive 18x, and a positive 3. And I'll let you try again to finish. All right, so I went ahead and went through to the point where you had negative 18 plus or minus radical 228 over 16. Doing your factor tree on that. Negative 18 plus or minus, you have a pair of 2's, and then you have a leftover 3 and 19, so 57 over 16. And then last step, all three numbers, can I divide them all? Yeah, I can divide them all by 2. So then I get negative 9 plus or minus, I don't really need the 1, you can put it if you want, radical 57 over 8. And we're good. Now, question got brought up, what if I moved everything the other direction? Do I still get the same thing? If you moved everything the other way, you get a positive 9 plus or minus radical 57 over negative 8. Is that the same thing? Same thing. So don't panic. If I read an answer, I will always read the answer with the negative on the top. That's just typically how you write them. But if you have the negative on the bottom, that's okay. Now, what if I put a negative on top and bottom? Then it's wrong, because two negatives would make a positive. So if you get through a problem and you end up with a negative on top and a negative on bottom, you should recognize that those are going to make a positive. Okay? The top of your fraction and the bottom of your fraction is going to make that positive. All right, questions on the quadratic formula. What happens if two of my numbers can be divided? Why? Good, it's got to be all three. It's got to be all the parts and pieces. The most common mistake I see students make is if they have, like, I don't know, 4 plus or minus radical 3 over 6. They see this, and they're like, oh, yeah, I can divide both 4 and 2 can be divided. There's another number here. Okay? A lot of times, like, if there's a number here, they recognize, because there's 3 numbers, like, no, I can't do it. But when it's not there, people forget that it really is there. Okay? So just beware.